Hello, everyone. I'm Jose Betancourt. With me today, I have Rich Butler from RageWorks.net. What's going on, man?
Hey, brother. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being the first official guest. Now, this is a photography podcast, but you and I have met many, many years ago podcasting.
That's right.
Whether it was electronics, video games, entertainment in general, we've talked about almost everything. We never talked about photography on a podcast.
That's right. We have not.
And the funny thing is, we really didn't know that we were both into photography. I think you might have been into it a lot earlier than I have because you do video and you do, as I stated, you've been in podcasting a very long time, but you've been doing videos, I think, a lot longer than I have. And to your credit, you're, in my opinion, a lot more advanced in your video work than I am. But because of video, I remember our first conversations about cameras was a Canon 70D.
Yep, I had a 70D. That was one of my first. I think a lot of it for me was because you know, when you're running your own site or whatever the case may be, and you know this, you got to learn everything and anything you need for the site because, number one, you don't have money. Number two, you have a person who has that skill set. So, a lot of it was self-taught, from podcast editing to even photography. And a lot of that stuff, even that still, it's a work in progress, like I don't shoot in manual full time because I'm just not comfortable in it.
Yeah.
But I try to, or I'll try and do like shutter priority or aperture priority, but full manual, even with video stuff, I don't do just because I'm not there yet. That's where, the skill level changes because, like I said, you shoot manual, you're fully well versed in all that. And that's what I mean when I say that for a lot of the stuff, it's, you have to learn it, but it's still, I'm still learning. It's incomplete,
Yeah. And I'm still learning as well. And that's the basis of this podcast.
Right.
Is that I'm not an expert. I'm not someone who has a magazine or have been given the luxury of being published for an art show or whatever. I'm learning. So as I learn, I just document what I'm learning. But the funny thing was, I think when you had your Canon 70D, I was in the process of looking for my first DSLR, and I did make an episode regarding that, which was the Nikon, a D3400. Then I worked my way up to a D7100. But I remember when researching which camera to get, the 70D at the time for Canon was like the camera to get for vloggers because of the autofocus system.
Yep.
Now, how good was that autofocus system?
Well, here's the funny thing. The 70D I ended up getting initially. I had bought a Sony A6300, I want to say, and love the Sony system at the time, and it was great. Took amazing photos, but that articulating screen it didn't have it. So I'm sitting there and I'm reading different workarounds and watching different YouTuber videos, and they're like, oh yeah, all you got to do is buy another monitor. And I'm like, I'm going to buy another monitor. I'm like, I just paid this camera plus what I paid for the lenses, whatever. So I ended up selling everything and getting, like I said, the 70D. And the 70D I picked up because it had that dual purpose functionality of just having that really good dual pixel autofocus for for video and for photo. And on top of that, the quality of lenses I was able to use were very, very vast, and they were very, very affordable. I mean, the Nifty 50, I think I bought for like $75.
Yeah.
And, I used that and like the kit lens, and I did a lot of photos and videos. And then I stayed with Canon for a while, but the 70D was just heavy, you had to wear it around with like a big lens. So I went to the I went back to Sony for a little bit. Couldn't get past the damn monitor, and I'm like, I need that Canon level autofocus, but I need a smaller form factor, and that's when Canon started doing their mirrorless. So I picked up the M50, and I used the M50 for for quite some time. But what happened was with the M50, you can only do 1080p because if you shot in 4K for video, you didn't have this image, the stabilization crop factor.
Yeah.
So
yeah, would zoom in.
Yep. So what ended up happening then is I said to myself, Sony had come out with the A6400, which is what I have now, and they added an articulating screen that folded up, and I said, all right, that's a positive. And then they removed the recording limit, because what happened was when you would shoot with the Sony cameras, they would either overheat or they would break out, the files would get broken into smaller formats if you went over a certain time period. But the 6400, much like a lot of Panasonic's cameras, no longer have those recording limits.
Wow. Yeah, I remember when you and I went to Photo Plus this year, and you were walking around with your Sony camera, and you have a cage around it, you had accessories hanging off of it, and it was still really compact.
Yep.
And the lens you have is a telephoto, and I think, what was it, 18 to 24 or something? Or 18 to 70?
18 to 35 was the Sigma. And that lens, that lens is phenomenal. And that lens is actually an adapted Canon lens.
Mm-hmm.
I had that lens on my M50, and I had that lens on my 70D and my 80D.
Yeah.
And it's carried me through.
It still looked compact, considering that you had a much bigger lens on it.
Yep.
Now, I remember, and I haven't talked about this on my podcast before, I had a Micro Four Thirds system for a while on top of my Nikon, and I used the not GFX, that's what I have now, but the Panasonic Lumix G7. And I had that strictly for 4K because it was one of the cheapest cameras that you can purchase that had 4K capability.
That's right.
And it was really small, has an articulating screen. I don't own it anymore, but you could still buy it at a cheap price. And it was a really good street camera because I could hold it with one hand and be very stealthy with it. But we all get caught up in sensor size and whether Micro Four Thirds is capable of competing with, let's say, full frame or whatever. But I will say about Sony, I remember when they came out with the first Alpha, and it was the Sony A1. They have so many that I forget what the original was called.
Yep, I had an A55 at one point. That was like my first camera. and that one, it was good because you could use Minolta glass. So I was buying like used Minolta glass.
Yep. Oh wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
no adapter, huh?
Yeah, I was buying used Minolta glass like online and just like really messing around and trying to learn how to shoot. But again, same thing. And I ended up selling that one because it had the very loud focus noise when doing video, and you just hear the bzzz.
Yep. That's when you need an off-camera microphone system, recording system.
Yep.
To combat that. But the thing with Sony is that Alpha system is full frame. And at the time, when I was just starting to get serious about photography, and I'm watching YouTube videos about this full frame camera that was the size of my Lumix G7, basically. And at that time, which is not long ago, it was about 5 years ago, I wasn't really keen on the idea of that there was a full frame sensor on this small body. And I remember listening to all the reviews and reading them, watching them, and everyone was really impressed, so surprised that Sony was doing this and stating that it was a game changer. I even met a parent at a swim meet for my son's school, and we were talking about cameras. He had a camera, big Canon lens, we're talking, and he's saying, I can't wait to get me the new Sony cameras. It's changing the game. But now that I look back, because I have a GFX system, which is big, is a medium format camera, but still small for a medium format camera. Sony really changed the game for the best and for the worst, because Sony is the manufacturer that not only a lot of these camera manufacturers use their sensor, but every like 6 months there's a new Sony camera. So they're treating it like a cell phone, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a big problem. But what happened is that they're, in addition to that, and that was a big, for me, like when I had the Sony A6300, I'm like, all right, it checks off all the boxes. Then they're like, well, but the 6500 has the in-body image stabilization and doesn't really overheat. And then after that, when they came out with the 6400, people got all mad. And they're like, what are we doing, going backwards?
Yeah, that was weird. That was really comical.
Yep, 6400. Then they did an entry level, which was 61, and then they did an the full kit, which was the 6600, which has in-body image stabilization and a bunch of stuff. So at that rate, think about it. You went from you did a low range, which has pretty much almost all of the capabilities as the mid range, and then the high range has the one that's really, really up there with all the capabilities. I think that what happens is, and again, this is an APS-C sensor versus a full frame. When you get into full frame, you got the A7S, A7R, all these other numbers, and it does become overwhelming. And I think that something that you definitely do quite a bit is that at the end of the day, you can shoot the best image, and the best camera is the one you have on you. Whether it's your phone or, your medium camera, your full frame camera, whatever the camera is, a gimbal. I mean, I just got into the Osmo Pocket gimbal.
Yeah, that freaked me out when you showed me that, because it's so tiny, and it's the capability of using that is so incredible. It's amazing.
Yep, and I think that's where so many people, you just got to find the best usage out of it. But a lot of it also is that a lot of YouTubers now are using a lot of Sony stuff. There's a couple of guys that are using more, like the Canon EOS R, which is Canon's more like pro level mirrorless, or certain Panasonics, because obviously the 4K, the unlimited recording, but now the barrier of entry is so small that you got guys shooting with like Blackmagic cameras now, because Blackmagic has a camera system now.
And that is strictly video, and the video quality is really amazing for the size of that camera.
Yep.
Now, not only do you see a lot of YouTubers using Sony, but you go on Instagram and you see, I follow a lot of photographers on Instagram, and a lot of them will show like how a shot was made. So they'll have 3 photos in one slide, and they'll show, the lighting system, and then of course they have the camera, which is a Sony system, and nothing wrong with that. It's just not my cup of tea. But the only problem I have with Sony is the fact that they come out with so many in such a limited time, which oversaturates the market. But if you're a smart consumer and you don't fall for the hype, you can make a wise selection and buy. If you're into Sony, you could buy a highly capable Sony Alpha for cheap.
Absolutely.
Brand new price too.
Yep, I got mine. The 6400 I got it from B&H as an open box, and it pretty much cost, I pretty much paid for it what I got when I sold my M50. So I sold my M50 and the lens, and I had 2 native EFM lenses. I kept my Sigma. So I sold the camera, the lenses, it had its own cage and everything. And the money I made back, I was able to pay for the Sony 6400 with the kit lens. So,
yeah, which is a great deal, because I heard that kit lens is not too bad either. Now, you stated the best camera you have is the one that's on you. A lot of people have mobile phones. And we were talking about the 70D for Canon. And that same autofocus system was on Samsung phones for a while too, which is why you were able to take such quick focusing shots. So that Canon autofocus system is really good. it has worked its way into a lot of things besides its camera bodies. So, being that you're probably, as far as time frame wise, you're probably into photography as the same amount of time as I have been. What has been the biggest challenge in photography so far?
The biggest challenge for me, number one, is getting fully comfortable, going beyond like auto or aperture or shutter priority and really learning the ins and outs. Because again, I didn't have, any sort of dedicated photography class or anything. So I'm just learning as I go. That's probably been the biggest challenge, especially when it comes now that I have a young kid. A lot of times I spend time just capturing photos of her.
Mm-hmm.
And about that is like anything else. It's the camera that you have on you.
Yeah.
So like when she was born, I took my big camera with me and I took like the first photos of her in the hospital. And, they were professionally, they almost looked like they were professionally done.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the bigger things that we have nowadays, that, to your point, people, they're into, crop factors, megapixels, this, that, and the third. It's the same thing with cell phones. And if you're just using a phone to call, text, and maybe watch the occasional video or two, you don't need the $1,200 iPhone Plus. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you don't. So it's the same thing with cameras, like, yeah, you can get the one with 22 megapixels, this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, the functions, meaning, aperture priority, shutter priority, and auto, are pretty much the same. Every system has those same three options at your disposal. And then obviously each one has their own other unique capabilities. But at the end of the day, that's been the biggest challenge, just getting more comfortable creating that stuff in a more manual format. But like I said, it's mostly because I want to do it so quickly that I don't want to sit there and mess with the shutter and do all this stuff. Like, I just want to click and go, and then you leave it with at least 4 or 5 shots that I'll take, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure out of the 4 or 5, one will be good.
Yes, exactly. And because I'm into Fuji so much, street photography is a very big. There's a big community focused around street photography within the Fuji community. So one thing that a lot of the more well-known Fuji shooters who have showcased their street photos, there are some who will say that they put it in program mode, and the only thing they're worried about is getting the proper frame and the proper subject to go together with what they have in their head. So it's not all about being a purist all the time. Like for me, I forced myself to use manual as soon as I got my first DSLR because I wanted to know the basics. I wanted to know that if I do put something on program mode, what is the camera going to do? And if it's something that I don't agree with, then I can have a backup plan and do it manually. But the thing with camera bodies, and this is a funny story because last year I just wanted, like, for some reason I woke up one day and I started looking at the Fuji X Pro 1. I started looking at videos, I started looking at reviews, and for some reason I just had to get me a Fuji X Pro 1. I was looking on eBay. I was trying to compare prices just to see how it would average out, make sure I wasn't getting jerked around. And of course, when you buy something on eBay, you just don't know what exactly you're going to get. So I found one that was starting, I believe, at $300. And then the seller was asking you to make a bid. So I bid it at the starting price. So he goes, I'm going to have to decline your offer. I think I'm going to get me $400. I said, okay, no problem. I'm placing myself a bid anyway. Lo and behold, I won the bid at $300. But when I got that camera, and it's one of Fuji's oldest cameras, I was so enamored with the style, the feel, and then of course I paired it up with 35 millimeter f1.4, and I was like, oh my God, these images they feel somewhat old, but of course they're digital, so it's not truly a film, but it felt like a film look. And that's when I realized that with that older camera that I paid $300 for, I can still do things that I can do with a more expensive camera. And, you know, the most important thing about photography or purchasing photography equipment is to make sure that you have a lens that you know exactly what you're going to get from a view standpoint. Like when I bought the 23 millimeter, when you have APC, or I always say it wrong, but you have to account for the magnification.
Yep.
So and you have a field of view that is similar to a 50, but not with the 23. It was more like a 34 or a 35 millimeter. So I had to get used to that because for a while I was walking around with 35 millimeter, which was close to a 50. And so when I shot my first image with the 23, I was like, oh my God, now I have to adjust and re-familiarize myself with a new viewpoint. And so that's when I realized, okay, I'm going to use this 23 as long as I can until I know without having to look through the viewfinder that I have something that is within a frame that is going to match this particular focal length. And so, I always say to people that want to get into photography, get a lens that you're going to feel good with and make that the biggest purchase. A camera body, you can get away with a used camera body, but that lens, make sure that's the biggest purchase.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I think that the lens, and this goes back to what I said with that Sigma 18 to 35. I've gone through it already with 4 bodies, and it's still amazing for it still delivers amazing photos. I mean, the bulk of the photos I think I took of my daughter the first year were with that Sigma lens.
Yeah, Sigma is I haven't owned a Sigma lens, but I've seen them throughout the 5 years I've been really into photography, and they've come out with some really, like the cinema lineup. Those are like really, really good lenses. And I've shot with an old Nikkor 105 to it's a 105 millimeter f2.5. And that lens, even though it's not the sharpest, but there's a character to it. So they say, like, for example, I could buy the same exact Sigma lens that you own, Rich, but because it's glass and the way it's designed, that no two lenses are going to look the same. So each lens is going to have a character. So, yeah, because of, you're depending on glass. Glass on top of glass on top of glass. So there will be some different characteristics for the same lens.
Absolutely.
Now, what's your plans with photography? Like, is it something that you plan to get into more, or are you going to do what a lot of new photographers tend to do when they first start, is take photos of the family and then expand? Like, what's, if you do have any plans for the future as a photographer, what are they?
I think that the driving force for me is going to be definitely more photos just of my family, just because that's the easiest, and I think that's where the bulk of my time is spent. But then the secondary aspect is just getting better with product photos for a lot of the content we put on the site. I definitely want to make sure that I don't have to go to the manufacturer's website to get a photo of a product to get like that really crisp product photo. Like, I'm starting to create more of them myself, like all the thumbnails and stuff. I'll try and do like an overhead shot on a desk and try and frame it out to make it look like a more natural product shot. So I think that's really been the bulk of it. And obviously just upping the video aspect of my game too with the camera I have, because now that I went back to Sony, I went back to utilizing one camera. When I was using the M50 or some of the other cameras, I was using the camera for photos, and then I had a separate Sony Canon camcorder which I was using for video, which had like the XLR handle, and I was plugging the mics into it and everything. But when you're a one-man operation for event coverage, so you got to go smaller and more nimble. So, I've gone down to the Sony 6400. It's like that's got to be my photo and video machine, and I got to make sure that I'm 100% comfortable on both sides of the coin with that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that Sony camera you have is, as I stated earlier, it's really small, so it's definitely a worthy companion to have for video and photos, because it's tiny. And I was like I've seen them at Best Buy, but I've never seen it that close when we went to Photo Plus. And I'm like, holy crap, that thing is super tiny and compact, but powerful at the same time.
Yep, and that's what I mean. Like I wanted to go smaller footprint. I wanted to just carry less of a giant backpack, things like that. And I think that that's one thing that so many people get caught up in. It's like, oh, they buy all this gear, and it's like, listen, you got to lug all of that gear with you. Like when you were at the expo, you put all your stuff in one little backpack. You weren't uncomfortable. You kept it moving, and that's what happens. I'm like, listen, I don't need to carry 100 things. I mean, the only thing that's a limiting factor for me to have is just a good travel tripod in case of an emergency. But now that I got the Switch Pod, I got that covered too.
Yeah, and that's a monopod, right?
It can fold out into a small tabletop tripod, but it's also a good handheld, like a vlogging rig.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. You did show me that. That was a really cool design. Like, it's really flat when you fold it.
Yep.
Yeah, I just bought myself a tripod that has some carbon fiber in it, so it's really light. And it was on sale during Black Friday. And so it folds away really nice and compact. And because I have a Fuji GFX, I'm learning more and more that it's better to have a tripod with me. I don't use it all the time, but there are times where if I want to get a really low shot, I'm not going to be struggling to squat and hold this big old camera in a way that I would normally use a smaller mirrorless camera like my XH1 or my X Pro one. So, being that your daughter, she's very young and growing right before your eyes, and so having a camera right by your side, or your camera phone, or your smartphone, excuse me. Do you plan to print any of these photos out as time goes on?
Yeah, I think eventually we're gonna have to. I mean, right now, obviously with digital photography, it's like the photo album is kind of a thing of the past. You print as you go, but when you have kids, you want to kind of have certain things that you could pass on or pull out and show them, and not go, walk over to the screen and let me show you. So we've printed out here and there. I mean, my wife is a big Shutterfly user because she gets
cool.
fun. So she's always printing out photos of her, either that we take or that we take candidly, and she uses that and sends them around to certain people, or we use them for certain.
How's the quality? Because I've thought about using it.
Good. Quality is good for Shutterfly. I think she printed some photos just locally, like at CVS, and like the color was kind of washed out. The paper wasn't as good, but Shutterfly, she's never complained.
You can do that right on your phone, right?
What was that?
Shutterfly, you could do it right on your phone.
Yeah, you could do it on your phone, or you could do it right from your desktop. I think she's done it from the phone a few times, but it's good just to make gifts. Like we actually just sent my father-in-law like a mug with some photos of my daughter, things like that. So just real quick, and I think that's been a big thing, and I plan to do more of that, like more storybook, like storybooks and stuff like that, which I'll probably end up doing for her as she gets older.
Yeah, yeah. And as I stated earlier, you and I have known for many years, and so you've seen my son growing up.
Yep.
And
100%.
I still look at photos of when he's young, and it brings me back to when I was able to carry him. And he's like, your daughter's height, and I'm carrying him all over the place. And sometimes I miss that. So as you're a first-time father, it's going to go quick. And photography, it's such a great way to help with guys like us who have an only child, and you're seeing them grow so fast. And then sometimes you could look back to when they were younger and just get those memories back for a brief moment. It's really special. So my advice to you is just keep shooting away. There are plenty of Fuji shooters on several Facebook groups, and you see them doing that all the time, taking photos of their families and sharing it. And there are a few guys who I feel like I've seen their kids growing up, because I'm like, oh my God, they're so big now. And it's, 5 years of seeing their kids grow up. So there's something really special about that. And I advise everyone all the time, take photos of your family, print them, make a photo album. I have a photo album, an old one, and it's really old. When I peel back the plastic, it's so old that the glue sticks to the plastic, so it's basically useless. So I've been able to purchase smaller portable photo albums, and I have different size papers. So once I'm finished with my son's project, I want to do like a little book for that, and then make another photo album specifically for him. It's just fun. It's something to do. It's for us older guys. I'm older than you are. I'm 47, but gives us something to do. A nice little pet project.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just another way to keep photography active. I mean, all of my photos now, I have them stored on a server, and that's exactly it. It's like, oh, come stand at my computer screen and see these photos. Like, you still want to have like that coffee table book or that coffee table album of, or even just a coffee table book of your own photography. It's always nice. People like to see that stuff. And it just goes to show the versatility of the medium. I think so many people are like, I'm not going to lie. When I used to buy an iPhone, I'd buy it with the most storage just because I didn't want to delete anything. And now it's like, the iPhone I have, like, I think just of my kid, it's like, you have 1,500 photos, and it's like, oh, I guess I do. That's how it goes. And that goes back to what I was saying, about the camera you keep on you. But the digital photography, and I tell the people this, and I'll tell your audience too, just make sure you have some place to save everything, that you can account for, power failures, things like that. You want to have some sort of redundancy, because nothing is more heartbreaking than having, your entire kid's photos on a computer or someplace, and then that computer dies or the hard drive dies, and you lose all those photos, because that's a big, big, big thing,
Yeah, and there was someone I knew who, I think his wife, her father or something. There was a situation where someone needed to keep a phone active because there were photos that she couldn't. Well, at the time, as a matter of fact, it was my old partner. His father-in-law had passed, and his wife was like, I can't get rid of this phone. There's photos of my father. I want to keep videos of him, and I don't know how to, obviously we figured it out, but she was like so paranoid that they would shut the phone down, or the phone would just die out. The battery wouldn't come back on. And so, that desperation, there will come a time where that form of desperation will hit you, and you're like, oh my God, all these photos, what am I going to do? I lost my phone. It's stolen. Luckily with cloud storage, you have it somewhere. Amazon, you can upload your photos. Google Plus.
Amazon, Google Photos.
Google Photos, I mean.
Yep.
And so just even Flickr, it gives you like, I think, a gig or something.
Yep.
Well, no, a terabyte, I think, something like that. Or
yeah, they had one. They used to give like a big plan, and then once they changed the format, I think they made it to where it was tiered.
Yes, yeah, because they keep asking me to upgrade, and I'm like, nope. So there are free services that you can upload your photos for a little while. I pay the extra money on Apple. Like, we get a terabyte, and a lot of our photos are shared and uploaded there. But there's nothing like printing and having the physical version 100%. Of that photo and just seeing it the old school way.
Yeah, well, and like I said, it creates conversation because, like I said, if you have a nice coffee table book and, you know, people come over for the holidays and they'll see it or whatever, you want to thumb through it, or it just becomes it goes back to when we were younger and the parents would pull out the photo album with the embarrassing photos. Yep. I mean, you could still do all of that versus here, scroll through my phone, you know?
Yeah, and quickly before we run, when my last episode I talked about taking the team photo for my old football team, my high school football team. When I gave my coach the photo, and I had an extra frame, so I framed it for him, gave it to him, and the look in his face was, he had this big smile, and he was like, "This is so effing awesome."
Yep.
And I was like, wow, you know, like, and he's holding it and looking at it, and I'm like, that same reaction, I would not have gotten that same reaction if I was showing it to him on my phone.
100%.
And so there's a magic to it, of seeing it,
power.
Physical. Yeah, a physical, especially nowadays. I find myself, and sometimes I catch myself, and I force myself to slow down, like on social media, like Instagram or Facebook. Sometimes I'm just scrolling through photos and not really looking at these photos. And that's because there's an overkill of people posting photos all over the social networks.
Yep.
And a lot of the times you see a flood of niche photos, like what's popular now. Like before was the little globe or the little round ball. People were taking photos of this sphere, and you could see what's behind the sphere, or smoke.
Yep. There's always a theme. Everybody does a different one. The girlfriend dragging the boyfriend.
Yes, by the hand or
stretched hand photo.
And they're using the same color palette. And after a while of seeing so many of those photos, you tend to just keep scrolling because you're kind of like programmed to like, okay, I'm going to see the same thing. And then sometimes you overlook a really good photo. So part of what I do is I try to filter that out by deleting accounts, and I slow down when I scroll. So this way I'm not missing inspiring photos. And that's what inspires me, is seeing what other people do.
Yep.
Of course, the professionals and the forefathers of photography. I often look at old photos, even art, paintings, statues, whatever it takes to give me some inspiration. But mainly it's what I see other photographers doing. So yeah, sometimes I'm guilty of just scrolling past stuff, and 3 days later I'm like, wow, that's a nice photo, and it was like put up 3 days ago, and I feel like a jerk.
Happens, man. It happens. We consume so much content that it's like you have to stop and smell the roses,
Yeah. And you stated it correctly. We consume so much different content, whether it's YouTube, social media, photography, movies. Sometimes you just got to take it easy, take a step back, and feed yourself less. Enjoy what you're eating.
Yep.
So we're going to wrap it up. But before we do, Rich, tell everyone where they can find you.
You can find me on RageWorks.net and all of our content there. I have a personal Instagram, which is RageWorks Rich. I mostly just share sneakers and food and different photography that I just take on the go. But that's pretty much where you'll see more of the variety of content. In addition to that, obviously, you can find RageWorks on all social channels. You can find all of the podcasts on iTunes, etc., including Cheese, which is part of the RageWorks network. So you can just punch up RageWorks and you'll find us.
Awesome, Rich. So thank you. Thank you for joining me. And I look forward to seeing more photos of your daughter growing up and seeing you expand on your photography as well.
Yeah, man. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So take care. And as always, to the general audience, thank you for listening to another episode of Cheese, a photography podcast. Excuse me. I'm Jose Betancourt. Talk to you soon.